On the morning of May 18, 1980, the forests around Mount St. Helens stood silent, the air thick with tension. Birds flew low and restless. The ground, once solid, seemed to hum with a secret. Inside his wooden cabin, 52-year-old Harry R. Truman lit his final cigarette. He'd lived here for decades, refusing to leave, even as the warnings multiplied. "She won't hurt me," Harry said, gazing at the mountain. A sudden tremor passed beneath his feet like a warning whisper. Moments later, the northern face of the mountain cracked open like a wound. The earth screamed. A pyroclastic surge exploded outward at over 300 miles per hour. The force flattened everything in its path. Trees disintegrated mid-air. Rivers vaporized. Harry's cabin was swallowed before he could reach the door. A black cloud roared across the sky, turning morning to midnight. Towns miles away plunged into choking darkness. Ash poured from the heavens like volcanic snow. The mountain had awakened, and it remembered everything. The first eruption lasted just 9 minutes, but its fury carved history in stone. Photographers caught glimpses before they ran. The shockwave chased them like death. Down in Yakima, children screamed as daylight vanished in seconds. A farmer, old and blind, wept on his porch, whispering, "The war's come back." Survivors sprinted toward safety, not realizing there was none. Animals bolted in every direction. Helicopter pilots fought to stay in the air, blinded by soot and static. Radio stations crackled out, one by one. In Spokane, 200 miles away, the ash cloud rolled in like a plague. Streetlights flickered on in the middle of the day. Volcanoes do not whisper their intent. They roar, and the world obeys. For the first time in living memory, America witnessed a volcano tear open the land with prehistoric rage. The skies had turned black, and beneath them, silence fell, except for the distant sobbing of those who survived. In the weeks leading to the eruption, geologists had warned everyone. Seismic patterns, gas emissions, bulging earth, the signs were there. But people get comfortable with beauty, and Mount St. Helens was breathtaking. Tourists snapped photos of steam vents, unaware they were standing atop a loaded gun. The local government hesitated, weighing safety against economic loss. Roads stayed open too long. Barriers too weak. Harry Truman's refusal became a symbol of defiance. But it was a mistake that would cost him everything. The mountain had been asleep for over a century. People forgot what it meant for a giant to wake. Scientists scrambled to measure the change, but they were too close when the blast came. Some never made it back. The crater left behind stretched over a mile wide. What was once a peak of majesty became a yawning scar of ash and ruin. Nature doesn't negotiate. It just waits. After the eruption, the world watched with awe and horror. Satellite images showed a wound on the Pacific Northwest, smoke spiraling for hundreds of miles. The ash cloud traveled across the U.S., reaching New York in days. Flights were grounded. Crops were buried. Livestock died choking. Farmers tried sweeping ash from their fields, only to see it fall again like endless rain. It was not just the blast that destroyed. It was the aftermath. Respiratory illnesses surged. Water turned toxic. But within the destruction, life clawed back. Tiny ferns pushed through soot. Elk returned. But for months, the landscape remained alien. Charred stumps pointed like fingers toward the blackened heavens. And in the shadows, scientists returned to measure and mourn. The mountain still hissed, still whispered. But for now, it rested. A reminder that beauty and terror are often just two sides of the same coin. And sometimes, the earth must scream to be heard. Mount St. Helens changed the way the world viewed natural disasters. And it shattered the illusion of control. Scientists revised protocols. Evacuation maps were redrawn. Volcano monitoring programs received global attention. But the legacy was more than academic. Families mourned fathers, daughters, and friends, lost in the blast. The forest would grow again, but not the people. Memorials were built. Visitors came to stare into the crater, into the black heart of the mountain. They spoke in hushed tones as if afraid it might still be listening. Harry Truman became a legend, a folk hero turned ash. His stubbornness became a parable taught in classrooms. Every year the date passes, marked by sirens, silence, and stories. This was not the last disaster. But it was one the world would not forget. Because the sky had turned black. And in that darkness history had been carved, not in ink, but in ash and bone. April 26, 1986, Toto. 1:23 a.m. The moment the world changed. Silently. In the control room of Reactor 4, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, 26-year-old engineer Leonid Toptunov's hand trembled on the console. They were conducting a test, a routine safety procedure. But protocols had been ignored, reactors pushed beyond limits. A power surge. A delay. Then, a sound like metal screaming underwater. Steam exploded through the reactor core. Then fire. Then silence. Graphite blocks, exposed to air, ignited instantly. A radioactive inferno raged skyward. The night sky turned orange over Pripyat, but no alarms sounded in town. Birds fell mid-flight. Dogs whimpered. Children slept, and invisible death drifted on the wind. Radiation, silent, scentless and merciless, began to poison the land. But the people didn't know. They still danced, still laughed, still breathed in the monster. In those quiet moments after the explosion, a catastrophe unlike any other was already unfolding. 2 hours later, firefighters arrived with no knowledge of what they faced. Young men in heavy coats with no protective gear, laughing, joking, unaware they were stepping into death. "It's just a roof fire," one said, hoisting a hose. As they climbed ladders, their boots melted. Faces flushed. Then blistered. One collapsed, vomiting. They kept going. Heroism burned brighter than fear. On the bridge of death, families watched the glow in the distance, like northern lights in spring. Children pointed. Parents held hands. They didn't know that every second there took years off their lives. By dawn, the fire was contained, but the core was not. Reactor 4 still fumed, still bleeding poison into the atmosphere. And still, no one in Pripyat was told. The buses sat idle. Schools opened on schedule. Babies were born that day. And above it all, an invisible killer swept the clouds, seeking new victims by the hour. By midday, the first signs of sickness crept in. Hospital beds filled. Skin turned red, then gray. Vomiting began. Hair fell out in clumps. Still, no word was spoken. Government silence smothered panic. Doctors whispered, "Radiation," but couldn't prove it. In Pripyat's parks, families picnicked beneath trees dusted in fallout. Children rode bikes through irradiated puddles. A wedding continued in the town square, laughter echoing under a contaminated sky. Soldiers were told to stand guard. Some were 18, with no idea what radiation meant. Their uniforms soaked it in. Their lungs drank it. In those hours, Pripyat became a tomb. But the people were smiling. That was the cruelty of it. The enemy was unseen. And by the time they knew, it was far too late. The evacuation wouldn't come until 36 hours later. And when it did, they could only take what they could carry, and nothing else. Not even the truth. When the buses came, they came fast. No explanations. No details. Just orders. Temporary evacuation, they said. People locked doors they would never open again. Beloved pets were left behind. Photographs, still warm from the morning's touch, stayed on shelves. Trains rolled out packed with frightened families. Some smiled for children's sake. Others wept behind scarves. But the buses never came back. Within days, Pripyat was a ghost. Soviet authorities sealed the zone, burying truths beneath paperwork. Scientists arrived in white suits, faces hidden, counting invisible scars. Pine forests turned red overnight. Birds vanished. Machines melted where they stood. The reactor core still burned. To stop it meant digging beneath it, to prevent a second, even deadlier explosion. Miners were sent to crawl through the earth, risking death to save millions. They dug in darkness, shirtless, drenched in sweat and silence. They knew what waited. But they went anyway. The Chernobyl disaster would become the costliest industrial accident in history. But its true price was never counted. Thousands died slowly. Some still do. Generations were marked by mutations, disease, and silence. The Soviet Union's curtain of secrecy began to crumble. Truth leaked out. In coughs, in tumors, in barren fields. Chernobyl became a name spoken with awe and terror. The town became a time capsule, rooms frozen mid-meal, clocks stuck at 1:23. Nature returned, reclaiming concrete and steel. Wolves roamed schoolyards. Trees grew inside classrooms. It became a museum of horror and survival. Scientists now study it, tourists now photograph it. But it is not history. Radiation lingers. Ghosts remain. And if humanity ever forgets the price of arrogance and silence, the wind from Chernobyl may blow again, reminding us all that what we cannot see can still kill us. December 26, 2004. 7:58 a.m. Deep beneath the Indian Ocean, the earth groaned. A magnitude 9.1 earthquake ripped across the ocean floor, releasing energy equal to 23,000 Hiroshima bombs. But the waves didn't rise at once. On the surface, the sea fell silent. In Thailand, tourists smiled as the shoreline drew back like a curtain. Children chased crabs on exposed seafloor. Fishermen stared, confused, as boats rocked in suddenly calm water. And then, a wall. A 100-foot wave surged with the strength of continents. It slammed into the coast without mercy. Entire villages vanished in seconds. Cars tossed like toys. Hotels splintered. In Sri Lanka, a train with over 1,500 passengers was swept off its tracks, becoming a coffin of steel. In Banda Aceh, Indonesia, the ocean swallowed the city whole. Families were torn from each other. Bodies churned in black water. And still the waves came. Wave after wave. No sirens. No warning. Only water and death. The wave struck like a monster made of mirrors, reflecting horror from every coast it touched. In just minutes, the tsunami radiated outward, crushing the coasts of 14 countries. In India, entire fishing communities vanished. In the Maldives, islands were erased from maps. On the beaches of Phuket, people ran too late. The water roared louder than thunder. Glass shattered. Concrete dissolved. Parents clutched children, but the ocean took them. In a single hour, over 200,000 lives were lost or unaccounted for. Entire generations were gone. Cameras captured final moments. A man filming the wave before it hit, never seen again. Aid workers would find bodies days later, tangled in palm trees. The sea returned, eventually. But it was not the same sea. It had crossed a line, from life-giver to destroyer. And for those who lived, nothing would sound more terrifying than the silence just before the sea comes back. In the aftermath, only ghosts remain. The dead were everywhere, in fields, on rooftops, clutched in each other's arms. Survivors wandered barefoot, bloodied, searching for names among faces. Mothers screaming into the sky. Children standing alone in silence. Relief was slow. Roads were gone. Hospitals destroyed. The stench of salt and death filled the air. Makeshift morgues overflowed. In Banda Aceh, bodies floated through flooded mosques. Aid workers sobbed as they worked. No amount of training could prepare for this. Water lines stained buildings 15 feet high. New water. Identity was lost. Homes, schools, churches, temples, all dissolved into foam. But the grief was clearest in the silence. Survivors had nothing to say, only the sound of flies and waves that still dared to return. And beneath the debris, clocks had stopped. But the memories would remain forever, frozen in time where the sea had once taken everything. Stories emerged of impossible survival and unbearable loss. A Swedish father carried his daughter above his head as they clung to a floating door. In India, a fisherman survived by tying himself to a coconut tree for hours. A dog barked until a woman woke and ran, moments before the waves struck. Across the region, humanity rose through ruin. Neighbors fed strangers. Locals formed search lines with bare hands. Hospitals operated by candlelight. Survivors gave up food for others. Journalists cried mid-report. The pain was universal, and yet so was the instinct to rebuild. Little by little, the waters receded. Little by little, the dead were counted. And as flags flew at half-mast around the world, something else happened. A reminder that in the face of nature's greatest fury, the human heart still beats louder than the wave. And from the wreckage, life, somehow, always begins again. The Indian Ocean tsunami changed global disaster response forever. Tsunami early warning systems were installed. Global communication protocols rewritten. But nothing could bring back the dead. In their place, the world planted trees, built memorials, etched names on stones. The ocean remains. Still, blue, vast. It does not remember. But we do. We remember the way a mother held on too long. The way a town disappeared. The way the world watched, helpless as paradise became purgatory. The waves do not care. But we must. Because the next warning may be a low tide. A silent sky. A dog that won't stop barking. We can never control the ocean. But we can choose not to forget. Because the sky turned black that day. But from the ashes and salt, the memory of the lost rises, not in water, but in human will. September 2nd, 1666. London slept. In a bakery on Pudding Lane, a spark leapt from a dying fire and kissed a pile of dry straw. It took only seconds for flame to take root, minutes for it to bloom, and hours for it to become a roaring beast. The city was made of timber and pitch, ready to burn. Thomas Farriner's family escaped through an upstairs window, but their maid perished, the first of many. Bells rang through the night, but not fast enough. The flames, fed by wind, turned lanes into furnaces. Sparks jumped from roof to roof. People ran with buckets and prayers. In the distance, St. Paul's Cathedral stood proud, until it too was swallowed. Eyewitnesses said the sky glowed like hell. Ash rained down like snow. And as morning came, the fire still raged. It would burn for 4 more days. London would never be the same again. The fire was alive, and it hunted. Londoners filled the streets with carts, livestock, and desperation. The heat melted iron. The screams were louder than church bells. The Lord Mayor Thomas Bloodworth hesitated. A woman could piss it out, he said, dismissing the threat. His delay cost the city. Firehooks and gunpowder were available, but used too late. Mansions burned alongside taverns. Rich and poor alike ran shoulder to shoulder, clutching children and ledgers. The River Thames shimmered with firelight, filled with barges of fleeing families. Every hour, another district fell. And in the sky, a wall of smoke blotted out the sun. London, once proud and sprawling, had become a city of embers. The fire didn't just burn buildings. It burned belief, in walls, in wealth, in safety. What rose in its place was ash, sorrow, and the sound of a city gasping. By the 3rd day hope flickered. St. Paul's Cathedral, believed indestructible, caught fire. Its great wooden scaffolding ignited, and the dome collapsed in thunder. Fire devoured the sacred with the same hunger it gave the poor. Citizens dug trenches, demolished homes, tried anything to stop it. But nothing worked. The wind howled, and the fire followed. Even the king came to the streets. Charles II, in boots and ash-covered cloak, handed buckets, shouted orders, stood beside commoners. It was too late. The heart of the city was gone. 13,000 homes, 87 churches, 400 streets. And yet, by some strange miracle, only a handful perished. The fire moved too fast for death to linger. It took things, not time. And when it finally died, on the fourth day, it left behind silence and smoke and a city too stunned to cry. The fire ended, but its shadows lingered. Survivors picked through rubble, searching for heirlooms, letters, anything untouched. Children wept beside stone chimneys where homes once stood. Smoke curled from the earth like ghosts. And in every face, disbelief. The plague had ravaged London the year before, but this was different. This was fire, relentless, cleansing, cruel. Rebuilding began immediately, but suspicion festered. Foreigners were blamed, Catholics accused. Rumors spread faster than flames. A Frenchman was arrested for starting the fire, tortured, executed, later found innocent. Fear turned neighbors into enemies. But amid the hate, a strange unity formed. London's people, burned and broken, stood together. They had nothing left but each other. And in that, they found the strength to begin again. Because even from ash, something stronger can rise. The Great Fire of London became more than tragedy. It became transformation. The old medieval maze of alleys was replaced with order. Stone replaced timber. Fire codes were written. Insurance invented. Christopher Wren's new cathedral would rise, grander than the last. But London never forgot. Every flame became a lesson. Every ember, a warning. Today, a single plaque marks the bakery where it began. And atop a tall column, the monument watches the sky, not with pride, but vigilance. The fire had humbled a kingdom. It had reminded an empire that even power burns. And though the sky had turned black for 4 days, the soul of the city endured. Not unscathed, but unbroken. Because sometimes, only fire can reveal what's worth saving. May 6, 1937. Lakehurst, New Jersey. Crowds gathered to watch the future descend from the clouds. The Hindenburg, 804 feet of flying luxury, approached the airfield like a floating cathedral. A marvel of German engineering, it carried 97 souls. Cameras clicked. Reporters prepared their headlines. The air was calm, the descent routine. The mooring lines were dropped. Ground crews moved into place. Then, it happened. A spark, a tear, a whisper of fire near the tail. A flicker, then a roar. Hydrogen met oxygen and turned to fury. The ship ignited midair. Within 34 seconds, the Hindenburg was gone. Passengers leapt from the burning frame. Crewmen were thrown like rag dolls. Journalists gasped. One famously cried, "Oh, the humanity!" But the flames answered louder. The sky turned orange. Screams echoed across the field. Of the 97 aboard, 35 perished. But the true casualty was faith, in airships, in safety, in progress. Seconds stretched like hours. The Hindenburg's frame twisted in fire, its skin peeling in ribbons. Passengers screamed from windows, their faces lit in flame. Some jumped. Some burned. Most had no time to choose. The ground crew ran. Journalists kept filming, frozen by shock and duty. The blaze was a pillar, shooting upward like a signal to the gods. A woman clutched her son and leapt. He survived. She didn't. A steward carried a passenger to the exit, then vanished in the fire. Survivors crawled from the wreckage, clothes melted to skin. The smell of burning metal and flesh haunted the air. But in the wreckage, there was silence. Just smoke, and the soft sound of wind across scorched grass. A moment ago, the world had been looking up. Now, it could only look down. The cause was never definitively proven. Theories bloomed: static electricity, sabotage, flammable paint. But no theory changed the truth. Hydrogen and flame are not friends. The Hindenburg was the death of the airship era. Overnight, public confidence collapsed. No one wanted to fly in a balloon again. Zeppelins vanished. The skies became a graveyard of forgotten ambition. For Germany, the disaster was a political loss as well as personal. The Hindenburg had been a symbol of Nazi prowess. Now it was ash. But for the families of the dead, there was no ideology, only grief. Letters were recovered from charred suitcases. Shoes without feet. Photographs burned half to memory. And in smoky silence, the modern world learned that even the future burns when arrogance outpaces caution. Survivors spoke later in whispers. Some said they heard the hiss before the fire. Others said it was instant. A steward recalled seeing passengers pray in final seconds. Moi, the youngest survivor, just 8 years old, had no memory, only scars. Medical teams rushed to the field overwhelmed. Reporters' photos circled the globe. For the first time, a disaster was watched in real time. Not imagined, not described, seen. And that changed everything. The public's relationship with flight, with technology, was shaken. The idea that progress could fail, that man could fall from the sky, became real. And so, the airship dream died in a field of flame. Not with silence, but with the sharp cry of one man, sobbing into a microphone as history collapsed behind him. Today, a small memorial stands at the crash site. Grass grows tall. Birds sing. But the air feels different. Quiet, but heavy. The outlines of the mooring lines are still visible in the earth. Tourists walk slowly, reading names etched into stone. A rusted fragment of the Hindenburg lies in a museum, twisted, blackened, reverent. Engineers study the wreck. Historians preserve the footage. But none can forget that sky, that scream, that moment when the future fell. The Hindenburg was supposed to be hope, floating luxury, faster travel, elegant design. But fire rewrote its legacy. It reminded the world that even in an age of miracles, death travels faster than ambition. The sky turned black that day, and it has never truly cleared. August 29, 2005. The storm made landfall at 6:10 a.m. near Burris Triumph, Louisiana. Winds howled at 140 miles per hour. The sky collapsed in sheets. Trees bent like knees. Roofs lifted like paper. But it wasn't just a storm, it was a reckoning. New Orleans had known hurricanes before, but this one was different. The levees that held back Lake Pontchartrain were outdated, weak. Warnings had come for decades. But budgets were cut, concerns buried. And now, the water was coming. In the lower Ninth Ward, grandmothers huddled near radios. Babies cried in the dark. Rain battered the windows like fists. And when the levees failed, they failed fast. Water poured through the city like a breach in reality. Houses floated. Cars disappeared. Entire neighborhoods drowned while people screamed from rooftops. Help did not come. The storm had passed. But the disaster had just begun. The water rose fast, swallowing stairwells, bedrooms, and breath. People climbed to attics, then to rooftops. Some had no time. Others were trapped in wheelchairs in bathtubs in silence. For many, 911 rang unanswered. On Claiborne Avenue, a man waved a red towel for hours. In St. Bernard Parish, entire blocks vanished. Helicopters flew overhead, too few, too late. Families carved holes in ceilings with knives and fists. The Superdome filled with thousands, hungry, sweating, afraid. Toilets overflowed. Babies cried for water. The lights failed. Days passed. Outside, corpses floated through neighborhoods. Inside, the air stank of sweat and desperation. And still, no rescue. A country watched its own citizens suffer, not from the storm, but from neglect. Katrina wasn't just water. It was betrayal. And it left scars deeper than floodlines. In the Superdome and Convention Center, people waited. Hours became days. Supplies ran out. Guards stood helpless. Stories spread of violence, of tragedy, of childbirth in filth. Government officials debated logistics while bodies rotted in wheelchairs. I know. A man died on the sidewalk and was covered with a blanket, and left for days. The rich had fled. The poor remained, mostly black, mostly forgotten. And as the waters receded, so did the illusion of equality. The city of jazz was now the city of trauma. Reporters wept on live broadcasts. Volunteers arrived with food and tears. But the damage was done. It was not the hurricane that broke New Orleans. It was the silence after. The waiting. The abandonment. The truth that in America, even a disaster picks favorites. After the flood came the reckoning. Homes coated in mold. Schools gone. Families separated by states. FEMA trailers parked on lawns, rusting. Insurance denied claims. Some never returned. Others returned to silence, to rot, to ghosts. The lower Ninth Ward was a grave. Volunteers came with hammers and hope. Musicians returned with brass and sorrow. But much of what was lost stayed lost. Trust, mine. Time, mine. Roots. Katrina became more than a storm. It became a dividing line. Before and after. Life and loss. The jazz still played, but now it had a shadow. Every trumpet cried a little longer. Every street mural bore the weight of memory. And every time the clouds rolled in, people looked up and remembered the water. Today, Katrina is a name that echoes. A symbol. A scar. New Orleans stands, but it still limps. Levees were rebuilt. Protocols rewritten. But the pain remains etched in murals, in music, in memory. Cemeteries still whisper. Storm drains still murmur warnings. And each August, the skies feel heavier. The world watched a city drown, and hesitated. That hesitation cost lives. More than 1,800 souls. Some never found. Some buried nameless. But the spirit of New Orleans endures. In brass bands that refuse to be silenced. In second lines that dance through grief. In every jazz note blown in defiance. Because the water took homes. But it did not take the soul. And though the sky had turned black, New Orleans still sings. And always will. September 11, 2001. New York City. A cloudless morning. Ordinary. Beautiful. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact was thunder. Fire burst from the steel skin. People looked up, confused. Some thought it was a terrible accident. 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower, and the world changed. Flames billowed. Glass rained from the sky. Newscasters gasped mid-sentence. In those burning towers, thousands were trapped. Office workers waved white cloth from windows. Some jumped. On the streets, people stared in horror. Sirens screamed. The skyline, once a symbol of triumph, now wept smoke and fire. Across the river, silence fell. The city of motion froze. And the sky, once so blue, turned black with mourning. What had begun as a morning commute had become the start of a nightmare. Inside the towers, time unraveled. Stairwells filled with smoke. Calls were made, last words spoken into voicemails. "I love you" became the last sentence of hundreds. Firefighters raced up as others ran down. Some never returned. In the South Tower, an announcement declared, "The building is secure." Minutes later, it fell. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. The roar swallowed the city. A tidal wave of dust surged through streets. People ran, blind, coughing, screaming. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower fell. 2 giants, gone. The dust cloud moved like a monster, wrapping lower Manhattan in a shroud of silence. Phones stopped ringing. News anchors cried, "I." No one could breathe. And in the heart of it all, ground zero. Fire, ash, broken steel, and a loss too large to speak. As the towers crumbled, another plane hit the Pentagon. A fourth crashed in a Pennsylvania field, stopped by passengers who refused to surrender. Heroes on Flight 93 fought back, knowing they'd never return. "Let's roll," one of them said, and they did. At Ground Zero, first responders clawed through debris. They searched with bare hands, with broken hearts. The air was thick with ash and sorrow. Some pulled survivors from the ruins. Others dug for friends. The smell of burning paper, melting wires and death coated every breath. Firefighters rested only to weep. Dogs grew too sad to search. Above them, the flag still flew. Torn, tilted, but flying. America had been struck. But in the rubble, courage stood tall. The world mourned. From London to Lahore, candles lit windowsills. Vigils glowed in silence. In New York, walls became memorials, faces of the missing taped to fences. "Have you seen my brother? My wife was on the 104th floor." Stories poured out. The firefighter who ran into the tower after his shift. The woman who gave up her elevator seat. The janitor who led dozens down through smoke. The nation stood still, airports empty, hearts full. And then came the echo. War. Fear. Flags. Security lines and silence. The sky had fallen. And though we stood again, something was forever bent. Every siren reminded us. Every anniversary. Every empty chair. The wounds were invisible, but they were there. Like smoke, seen, then gone. But never forgotten. Today, 2 beams of light rise where the towers once stood. Silent, stark, sacred. The 9/11 memorial pools flow endlessly, names carved in bronze. Visitors move slowly. Some cry. Some stand silent. Some touch names with trembling hands. The Freedom Tower rises beside it, glass and steel, proud and defiant. But it is not the same skyline, not the same world. 9/11 changed everything, politics, airports, innocence. But it also reminded the world of humanity's strength. Strangers became family. First responders became legends. Became legends. Survivors became storytellers. And grief, though heavy, became shared. Because when the sky turned black, it also filled with stars. Stories of courage, of love, of sacrifice. The towers may have fallen, but the spirit never did.